Good afternoon and welcome to the session where we will explore the North Sea as a springboard for the green transition. Welcome to our audience here at the COP, the Blue Zone of the COP26, and to those of you who are joining us on the live streaming. My name is Adele Sheridan. I'm a senior business developer at Sintef, a not-for-profit independent research organization based in Norway, and I have the pleasure of being your moderator for today. It has never been more clear that the challenges, the climate change challenges, have become an emergency. We need collective, coordinated, and immediate action. We have not failed, as some have suggested, but we have not succeeded either. Looking around you at the COP26 gathering, we can really see there are many real viable solutions under development. The North Sea is an ideal platform for further development and combination of many of these technologies. So let's get started. I would like to introduce to you Dr. Niels Røkke, the Executive Vice President of Sustainability at Sintef and currently the Chair of ERA. He has also headed the Nordic Centre of Excellence with CCS, and Professor Asgeir Thomsgaard, Director of NTRANS and Professor at NTNU, the Norwegian University for Science and Technology. And his research is looking at energy transition strategies and energy policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edel. And as you said, the North Sea is really an ideal playground for the countries surrounding the North Sea basin to look at how can we exploit the resources there in a sustainable manner. And that is what we're going to talk about today, and how we can do this in a joint effort and build both on the existing assets which are there, but also develop new assets. And we have made a small video as an introduction to that with our three advisors. So let's hope this works. Wow.
Thank you very much. Today, we're very fortunate to be joined by Espen Barth Eide. He's the Norwegian Minister of Climate and the Environment. He's a Norwegian politician and academic, currently a member of the Norwegian Parliament, and he has earlier served as the Minister for Defence and the Minister for Foreign Affairs. He has been a member of the Norwegian Parliament since 2017 and represents the Labour Party. Mr. Espen Eide, please. Yes.
Okay, microphone, I guess.
Well, thank you very much to Sintef and Bellona, and if somebody fixes the sound. Little closer, all right, that sounded very noisy. Great to be here. We very strongly believe in this work. I have had the pleasure, I should actually have listened first and then commented because I'm much more polite, but I actually have heard it because we have I have been through this before, and I will tell you that what you're going to hear is something that is really amazingly interesting, fascinating, and that can be done. And as you saw from the little film, the ideas are already there. The challenge is to scale and collaborate and cooperate, and the collaboration has to be across the sea, between nations, but also across sectors, because much of the recommendations, the North Sea, while it looks large, is not unlimited. So we have to use the space as smartly as we can. And by connecting different sectors and different businesses in their transition to green, you can have, my favorite theme, for instance, is ocean wind parks with fish farming between them, which is a perfect synergy, because you need some space between the fish farms. You obviously have electricity, you will have a logistic systems, and you can do, clean and sustainable fish farming in the same area, because you cannot trawl, you cannot do fishing in precisely that area, just as an example. And Norway has been a seafaring nation, as the Scots will remember 1,000 years ago, and the English, we've been around, and we used to be quite active in the region. So connecting countries is not a new idea. Now we want to do that in a peaceful and collaborative manner. And my party, the Labour Party, who was then in opposition, but who are now in government, actually a year and a half ago, we presented what we call the North Sea Plan. And the Labour Party's North Sea Plan was about exactly this. How can we start? How can we go back to basics, back to the Norwegian North Sea? Looking outwards, of course, but in this case, the Norwegian North Sea, where the oil and gas adventure started 50 years ago, and try to again build new industries in energy production, in carbon capture storage and hydrogen, in green shipping, and try to build that precisely on the shoulders of that very advanced industry that was produced by the 50 years of oil and gas. So there's a very clear link between the oil age and the coming renewable age, where we can do well. But we will do much better as a country if we do it with the others. So with the UK, with Denmark, with the Netherlands, with Germany, with the EU, with everyone around, I think we need to build an idea of the North Sea as a new an area of green transition, a maritime green transition that really can come to scale through cooperation. And then we, for instance, need to build infrastructure. If we want to build energy links, we need a common infrastructure that can be used by producers and consumers of clean energy alike. So some kind of North Sea grid. We have to exploit the fact that this area, and you will hear more about this, but I'll just comment on it anyway. It's one of the, I think, 3 areas in the world where you have absolutely the perfect combination of the right amount of wind, not too little, not too much, and people, right? Because you also have excellent wind on the middle of the Greenland ice, but limited amount of people and industry. Where you have that combination is on the east coast of America, it's in East Asia, and the North Sea. So we have an excellent area and where a lot of things can happen. But then we need creative thinking. We need education, we need research, we need imaginative and clever politicians who look ahead rather than backwards. And we need Sintef and NTNU. So I just want to say that I'm happy to be here, and I apologize for us speaking first, because I would rather have commented, but I'm also negotiating Article 6. And if that doesn't work, the whole COP will be failed. So you don't want that. That's why you have to allow me to speak first. And thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ida. And I think we can, as an Irish person, at least I can appreciate very much the collaboration between Norway and Ireland. And I very much welcome, and I think we've had good experience despite what they say about the Vikings. So, to continue with our program, I'd like to introduce a little about the centres and to provide a little information about the main goals and messages.
Yes, so thank you. So this report, the North Sea as a springboard for the green transition, is based on research coming out of 4 Norwegian research centers for environmentally friendly energy. So these are the NCCS Center, the North Wind Center, focusing on the future technologies for wind, the Entran Center, the Norwegian Center for Energy Transition Strategies, and the Low Emission Center, who looks into concepts and technologies for offshore energy systems, integrated renewable energy systems. And these centers all share the vision that the research should be a fundament for fact-based policy advice, science advice, in such a way that decision makers could use the research as part of their decision fundament in the future transition. And it's also such that these centers have a very strong international component, a very strong education component, master education and PhD education. The international cooperation is there because this work is, of course, relevant all over Europe and the world. And we also got some of our partners to co-sign on these recommendations that we come with. So these partners are the Ruhr Universitet Bochum, it's the British Geographical Survey, it's University of Strathclyde, it's Fraunhofer and TNO. It's Technical University of Denmark, and it's University of Oslo, and it's University of Zurich. And these are just a few that I'm sure if we asked more, they would also have signed these recommendations.
So, really, I mean, Espen, you said a lot about, you obviously heard this before, you know, and I'm really happy to see that you endorse the ideas we have here, because of what I've written down here is more or less a copy of what you said. I mean, the possibility to work together, you know, and then to use the existing assets. I mean, North Sea has provided us with fuels, with food, with all kind of goods, and now we need to see how we can develop this in a sustainable way. So these are our three recommendations in Norwegian, in English this time. And if we move on to the first one, so maybe a bold statement: a fivefold increase in education, research, and innovation investment is needed now. So why are we saying this? Well, some of these technologies, you can already deploy them, but they are not scaled and they're not optimized. So we need to pursue that with a strong momentum. And this applies to CCS, which I know is the Norwegian government's strong support for this, which also relates to the wind, of course, offshore wind. We've heard about earlier last week, we heard about also the exciting developments in Shetland in that space with offshore wind. And then go with this scale. We're talking about scaling up these kind of technologies by a factor of 20, 100, 200. Never done that before. I mean, you can find that for smartphones maybe, but if you look at offshore wind or if to the storage capacity you need, these are the scalings you need. And so you may ask, why 5? Well, the IEA says you need to scale by exact number, 3.6 actually, which is hard to see how they figure out that number. But Bill Gates and the likes says scale up by 5 of the present efforts. And yeah, would be tempting to have a comment from the minister about the new budget proposal on that, but I'm not quite sure if you're ready to do that now. Sorry.
Yeah, so this picture is a vision about the future of the North Sea, where you can see that, of course, you have huge amounts of offshore wind, huge potential. You also have the possibility to link together the North Sea countries with cables and pipelines. And you could imagine that former oil and gas installations could be used as energy hubs that could produce hydrogen, they could facilitate carbon capture and storage. They could also be links that links together in a huge offshore, flexible offshore grid, the offshore wind installations in the North Sea. In addition, those energy hubs could provide hydrogen for maritime transport. You could imagine that these hubs, by the energy produced by electricity and hydrogen, could also be a substantial part of decarbonizing European industry in the future. Obviously, to succeed with a vision like this, we would need collaboration.
Yes, with you, which is slide number 2 here, or advice number 2, which is really about the collaboration. And returning again to the IEA Net Zero Emission 2050 report, which says that if we continue with the cooperation we have on the global scale, as we do now, we will be 40 years delayed in reaching net zero. And obviously that cannot happen. So how can we enhance cooperation? this is a practical case, I think, in North Sea countries, how we can collaborate. But there is also a possibility to export this kind of thinking that Asgeir was talking about with these energy islands, with multiple of energy carriers and production to other areas in the world. So it's truly a kind of a global solution. And
yeah, and we need to take care of nature and biodiversity. If you look at the huge amount of energy that we suggest to produce in the North Sea, it's going to be a massive industrial scale-up. And it's also so that we cannot afford that this industrial scale-up in any way will harm nature. So if you look at the areas that we need both at land and at sea to be able to do this green transition, it's going to be significant. And I think one of the most fundamental parts of this transition would be that we follow the advice of the UN Nature Panel to make sure that we protect biodiversity and we protect nature in the process.
so that was the three advices. And now we have some videos. You're going to introduce them?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, good.
So now we're going to take a little bit more of a deep dive and look at the various projects that were involved, or the research centres that are involved in producing this document and what they are doing, what activities. So we have 3 short video clips for you, and then afterwards we will have a presentation by one of the leaders of the centres. So, yeah.
My name is Pandey, and I'm the director of the Vision Success Research Center and CCS. So I will tell a bit about CCS in Norway and in the European perspective. This is a map of Norway, of the UK and Europe. And Norway had a state project on CCS coming up. It's for capturing CO2 from cement industry and waste incineration. So now we have some sources, and then the values we transfer CO2 from there. One of the Norway resident sheep. For example, here outside Jordan, source CO2 and storage. This is a very important project funded by the British government and has the potential to be established in the advice. Building a CCS scheme is also the resources to capture the CO2 and deliver to this long-ship project. Also, the transfer and storage parts for long rights. So, then if you have a processing industry, mining industry, or whatever, somewhere in Norway, you can capture and deliver it to this ship. Maybe not this to and deliver it here for injection and storage. The project stand last year on 1.5 million tons of CO2 per year, and to be a project technology enough to have kind of mitigation action. So this has to increase a lot. My name is Olaf, and I am the director for the Norwegian Research Center. In the Norwegian Research Center, we develop technologies and solutions for reducing emissions on continental and the North Sea. We need all technologies and solutions that are available to us to reduce emissions across all sectors. And reducing emissions on government is also important. Technologies and solutions that we develop in the Norwegian Research Center can also be applied in other applications of transition to a zero-emission society. A good example of this is the use of our tools such as ammonia and hydrogen in power generation. In the center now, we're focusing on offshore use, but can also be applied to onshore use in any industry. in order to reach our climate targets, we need a sector-wide collaboration, and this means collaboration both with industry and with actors. And this is something that we have established in the Innovation Center, where we have a very wide agency participation, as well as good support from the government. This is absolutely essential to actually realize the solution, to get them out of their lab, to get them to be used by the industry, and this that actually contributes to actual emission reduction and helps us achieve our goals.
Right, and the last one from our friends in TNO.
Hello, I'm Olaf, working at TNO as a project manager in Sintef project. TNO is an independent research organization working in energy transition. Our team works with Sintef and utilization. And in the Dutch scenario, the waste energy sector is pioneer of CO2 capture projects with commercially available plants and full-scale projects that are already approved. And this year, is actually sent to the greenhouses, and these are boys that burn natural gas. And my team is working on de-risking these projects and helping to implement it faster this technology. And this in the future, in combination with storage, will lead to negative emissions. And actually, a little bit we keep working on carbon in the industry to help achieve our plan.
So I hope that gives you a taste of what the centres are doing at really trying to get the technology out of the lab and into real application where it's needed. I'd like to also welcome to the stage now Dr. Jon Olaf Pandey. He is the director of the North Wind Centre and chief research scientist at Sintef, and really a pioneer in floating offshore wind energy. So Jon Olaf, we'll just move this over here for practical reasons, and the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. I'm happy to be here. So we need it all. We need CCS, we need energy efficiency measures, we need renewable energy, and I believe offshore wind will be a big part of this. We are really in an energy revolution. The European Commission has a goal that by 2050, offshore wind will cover 1/3 of the electricity consumption in Europe. 1/3 of the electricity consumption in Europe by 2050. I believe that is actually quite realistic. It's possible to achieve this. If we continue installing and developing offshore wind farms, scaling up a bit like from today, this is achievable. But it has to come also with developing an offshore grid to make the supply sustainable and reliable and affordable for the consumers. And to make sure of that, the combination with hydrogen is of course excellent, but you also need to figure out technical solutions that you can implement in a large scale. And this we are all working in the center I'm heading, Northwind, and we work on this also together with European partners in the European Energy Research Alliance, and we work also with international partners outside of Europe. So this is, of course, something where we need international collaboration. And we also need to scale up the activities in research, as was mentioned. And for this, we have introduced what we call a Lighthouse Initiative. And the Lighthouse Initiative is a big European project that hasn't been realized yet, but what we are proposing. And it should be on developing offshore grids, and it should be on developing floating wind. And why floating wind? Yes, it's because it's an environmentally friendly solution. Floating wind is simply wind turbines floating in the sea. They are not fixed to the seabed, so you don't have to do piling or things like that into the seabed. It can be placed further out in the sea, away from fishing or other interests. So it's it's a solution that is easier to implement with less environmental impact. And these two projects we like really to scale up research and innovation to make reality before 2050. We think that a floating wind can be affordable already by 2030. And we think that a sustainable energy solution is absolutely also possible by 2050 if we scale up research and innovation the way we like to do it. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan Olaf. So I'd like, so if you could please stay for the scientific panel. I will just move this over a little bit, please. And I'd like to welcome to the floor Professor Arnold. He's a professor at the University of Strathclyde, which I believe is based here in Glasgow, which was an education to me, which is very nice to know. And Olimpo's area of expertise is on the power system dynamics and modeling and the control of the wind power plants and how to control the system overall. So thank you. And I'd also like to welcome Dr. Arnold van Dingere, Chief Scientist at Frankhover Institute for Wind Energy Systems. He has a master's in civil engineering and a PhD in the fatigue of tubular steel structures from the Delft University of Technology, and has a lot of knowledge on floating wind. So I'd like you first to take a moment each to get your input and your thoughts about what's presented today and also the status in the area, and then we'll take a few questions for the panel.
I remember a few years ago at the German ministry, people said like, we're not going to fund floating wind because the German part of the North Sea is very shallow and we can use bottom-faced turbines. That is, of course, not true. Climate change is not a national problem, and the solution cannot be found on a national level. It can only be done together. And if we don't want the turbines in our backyards, then they have to be put offshore, and offshore for most parts of the world means deep sea, which is why the North Sea is such a perfect place to start with offshore wind, but also to go to floating for the first time. From the North Sea, go to the other European seas, and then to the rest of the world. Because, for instance, the Netherlands, the country isn't big enough. If you'd use the whole country for onshore wind, you'd still not be able to get enough electricity for the Netherlands. I mean, most countries are a bit bigger than that, but you get the idea. And this is why we need to work together. And this is why we need floating winds and good grid structures, which is why we need the Lighthouse products from ERA.
Yes, and we'll hear more about that in a moment. Olaf.
Yeah, thanks very much, and very happy to be here. So yes, we still have a lot of work to do in offshore wind, and international cooperation is certainly going to be a central player. You know, the benefits of working together are evident in many sectors. You know, we have health, we have state exploration, but we also have examples in offshore wind energy. I can mention, for example, High Wind Scotland, the very first full-scale commercial floating offshore wind farm. It is a cooperation between Norway and Scotland. Also, the UK has been working together with many countries around the North Sea in the development of European submarine connectors, and also in the connection of distant offshore wind farms. So as Arnold and Jan Olaf, I certainly believe that Lighthouse initiatives can be perhaps that vital ingredient that will help to promote cooperation, but in my mind, perhaps more important, that will help us to accelerate the work that we need to enable both offshore wind and that super grid that we need in the North Sea. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So I have a few questions, and hopefully it will reflect a lot of the questions that are out there in the public. So how people are thinking about this who are not really experts in the field. And the first, I'd say, we see many onshore wind projects are very controversial due to their impact on the environment. So what do we do to really ensure that offshore wind really pays attention and consideration to nature and the environment? So maybe, Jan Olaf, you'd like to start with that?
Yeah, thank you. So I think making it to develop offshore wind or any other technology, we need to respect nature. It's not sort of an alternative not to do so. And we should certainly learn from what we've done on land and with other technologies already. And then the good news is that I think it's quite possible to do it. there was reports and studies being done on this already, which have concluded that if you do proper planning of offshore wind farms, proper implementation of offshore wind farms, it's possible to develop and operate them with a very low impact on the nature. But you have to take care. You have to do proper planning, you have to do proper implementation, and you have to do what we call environmental design of the technology. And there are solutions that can be implemented, and floating wind is one of these alternatives.
Yeah, well, just very briefly to reinforce what John Olaf said, in particular about planning, I think that we are in a very good position to do a proper development of offshore wind, and that's super great that we will need, because we know what we need, we know where the resources are, we know what is needed to be done, you know. So coordination between North Sea countries is essential, and I think that working together, we have an opportunity to basically be more ambitious, be more adventurous, and take a different approach where we put nature first, as opposed to looking for other aspects, you know. But yes, working together can give us that opportunity to be more risky and put environment first in the way we develop solutions and in the way we progress.
Yeah, just to add to the previous comments, it's important that we use all the sea, because we actually need the area if you want to generate that much wind energy. So you need to be offshore, you need to be deep, and by going floating, you also minimize the impact. For instance, hammering and foundations, and getting further away from the shore will lessen the impact on land-based nature. So both things actually are very strong arguments for floating wind.
But no, I'm going to challenge you there to the usual question I hear about offshore, particularly when you come to floating technology. Isn't it a lot more expensive alternative?
It's a hell of a lot cheaper than the results of climate change. No, I mean, people, especially opponents of renewable energy, are using this topic and happily forget to ignore what will happen if the poles, the glaciers melt. So floating offshore wind initially was thought to be quite a bit more expensive than bottom fixed. Bottom fixed offshore was already thought to be more expensive than onshore, but the price came down when we started large production. Floating, we can do a similar thing, and it may still be slightly more expensive than onshore, but it will be so much cheaper than the alternative, which is to let the climate come out.
Yes, and truly the alternative is really unthinkable. We see we do have to make these actions. When we take a kind of holistic perspective, because we've also looked at hydrogen and CO2 storage here, the holistic perspective with the system integration, for example, Oscar, what benefits are we going to see, and can we really integrate these systems together?
I think we absolutely need to integrate these systems together, because if you look at it, we think that already at the levels of renewables we have today, we can see that intermittency creates shortages of electricity in some time periods. And well, we just started. Over the next 20 to 30 years, we are going to electrify society. We are going to have an electricity demand that is much, much larger than today. And at the same time, we are going to decarbonize the power system. So it means a lot of more renewables to provide more electricity at any time, but still in a reliable way. And one good way to do that is to start looking at the integration between hydrogen production, how hydrogen is going to help the transport sector, the industry sector, possibly also the residential sector, and how carbon capture and storage links together today's fossil systems with natural gas and hydrogen and renewable systems. So our chance to succeed is if we get all these complex systems to fit together in a way that makes sure we can electrify society and we can have clean energy available when we need clean energy.
What do we need to kind of make that link between these systems? Because we see today now these technologies, some of them, I wouldn't say they're mature, but they're on their way there, but it's very much seems to be in silos. So what do we need really to get this integrated approach? Niels, maybe you can start with your inspiration.
Well, I mean, our first advice is a good start, I think, you know. We need to scale up these kind of activities, and the cross-enabling nature of some of these gases or electricity. I mentioned earlier on this Northern Horizon project with offshore wind producing hydrogen, producing ammonia, even connecting to synthetic fuels with biofuels, you know. At least that is an option in that one. And that's when we're talking about stranded electricity, really. And this is a lot of stranded electricity. I mean, you need to connect it up. And there is the possibility of connecting all these different pipelines and grids, as we showed in the slide that Asgeir was explaining, how this all works together. And it's almost too good to be true, you know, but that's also why we see Denmark, Netherlands, Belgium moving in this space. Huh?
Olaf, you don't clean there.
Yeah, I just want to add that obviously we need it all. And yeah, some years ago, I had a discussion with colleagues where we started discussing which renewable technology was the best. And of course, we can all agree that offshore wind is best. But let's be fair, there are other alternatives that are also very good. And I would say that it's sort of just doesn't make sense to have that kind of discussions. We need it all. We need CCS, we need hydrogen production, we need energy efficiency measures, we need all the renewable energy we can get our hands on. And this all fits together in the North Sea. It's really an excellent place to experiment, to combine all these resources. That's why we had the title as Springboard for developing this technology.
What do we need to further this? What do we really need to take a grip on this?
Accelerate the development we are already started. I think in the North Sea, we are already building offshore wind farms. We're already starting to store CO2. We need to combine this even closer and also to produce hydrogen. There are pilots on that, but in a larger scale on that, really to scale up and accelerate. I think that's the main message. Huh?
So essentially, we are really on our way, but we need a lot more effort, a lot more funds, and to accelerate in this area. I have one more question. I think I really need to ask this. We're looking at the North Sea, and we're looking at a very well-developed part of the world. How does this? How can these developments really benefit regions of the world that do not have the same advantages, that do not have perhaps the financial muscle to do things like this? So.
Okay, well, first of all, any green energy helps the complete world. There's no such thing as a green Norway. It's a green world. And everything that we can start to limit will help people all over the globe. Then, once we have started the work on the North Sea and transferring it then first to the other European Sea and further then to the rest of the world, we can really start to power up the complete world on the offshore wind, and then combine that with all the other forms that are equally important and also need to be developed. We will then have a decent chance of actually stopping the worst effects of the climate change. And I mean, time is running out and we need this research right now, because basically, if you want to say that we want to be carbon free by 2050 or 2040, then it means that you have to be installing those things like in 2030, 40. And it means that you have to do the research for that now, not in 10 years, because then you're already getting late. So if you really want to press a politician that is giving out numbers for 2050, ask for a reversed Gantt chart to explain how the various phases of the various products actually need to fit together. And if you do that, you see that we have to start today.
and we have the roadmaps essentially. Niels, do you want to come in on this?
Just a short comment. I mean, we had the Minister on Climate and Environment here, and is leading the negotiations on the Article 6. And it's also linked up with the climate financing. And I think replicating these kind of templates on how we can do this in Africa, in Asia, in the southern Mediterranean and so forth, and how we can use this kind of climate financing to support this kind of project, and also use this flexible mechanism which are negotiating would be a great way of transferring this kind of knowledge to other parts of the world. But on the other hand, I mean, this is going to be the cheapest way of producing electricity in the future. Huh?
So it looks like the tools are being set into place at the moment. I will allow one more comment from Jon Olaf.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to add that we talk about this as being a cost, but it's actually an opportunity. It's an opportunity to create great jobs, new industry, new activity, and basically a better world for everyone.
And on that note, thank you very much, because that's a very positive note to send, and it's a very motivating note to send. Thank you to all my panel here. We will have our next panel in a moment, but I'll allow you to take seats. Thank you. So I will ask Niels and Oscar to stay in place. It's a long stand for you guys today, but you're doing great. And I'd like to welcome the members for our industrial and NGO panel. So I would like to welcome Sean Lloyd-Rees. She is the UK Managing Director for Aker Offshore Wind and supporting other Aker companies in the UK. Her career started in the oil and gas business, working with Stena Offshore, before progressing across multiple lines of business in the Halliburton Corporation. And as we said, now we're very fortunate to have her working in Aker Offshore Wind. So Sean, welcome. I'd also like to invite up Frederick Halgan. So Frederick Halgan is very well known to all of us in Norway. He is the founder of Bellona. He founded Bellona in 1986, quite a few years ago now, when he was 20 years of age. Wow, that's impressive. And through academic work and legal action and non-violent activism, Bellona has really changed the opinion and set the agenda on many environmental issues in Norway. And this has really been a huge benefit for Norway's kind of thoughts and actions towards a sustainable environment. So I'd like to welcome you both. Perhaps I'll give you a minute to introduce your thoughts behind what you've seen so far, and then we have a few questions.
Okay, I'll go first. So I'm Sean Lloyd-Rees, the UK MD of Aker Offshore Wind. And I was asked my views on this report, so I've looked at it and I've actually spoken with the people involved quite a bit as well. And you can't but endorse it. I mean, it makes it's shown strong sense, all aspects of it. And it actually starts to feed in with a number of activities that are ongoing and thinking in the UK at the moment as well. So I sit on the Oil and Gas UK's board. And we recently negotiated a sector deal worth about 15 billion with the UK government, which is very focused on using the skills of the oil and gas industry, its knowledge of the North Sea, to essentially accelerate and transition the green future energy systems that we need to achieve our climate goals. And again, it was a very measured sector deal in that it was considered the skills, the capability, the knowledge all reside there. We've talked quite a bit now about offshore floating wind. As it goes into deeper water, those foundations are going to get much bigger. That's the skill set that really exists in the oil and gas industry. And we need to push and to transition it forward as we go forward. So I see us as being the right skill set to be able to work on accelerating the energy transition. And you mentioned as well the Northern Horizons integrated project that we talked about earlier this year. Very much an integrated energy approach, I think, is going to be the way forward in many ways. And those skills for hydrogen, carbon capture, and offshore floating wind just echo beautifully with what comes out of the oil and gas industry. But then if I come to collaboration, hugely important. So I work for ACA, so clearly we have a large organization in Norway, and we've also got a large organization in the UK, and we've been there for many decades. And there's a lot of cooperation there in terms of the learnings we get from each other, the developing projects together, the addressing of technological challenges together. I could go on and on about the cooperation and the collaboration that has really driven us forward to be fairly leading edge from a technology perspective. And then just one small comment back, I think, to the comment made earlier. Absolutely, Equinor and the project was the first floating offshore wind project in Scotland. Well, actually, the second was Kincardine, which is based on a technology principal power where we are one of the largest shareholders. So again, a good cooperation there between Norway and the UK. And then in terms of the second point, on the R&D, absolutely, we are a company that is known for spending our focus and our efforts into technological innovation as we go forward. And in fact, if I just share one example here, our whole history in subsea has been a huge cooperation between Norway and the UK, very much in terms of one country moving ahead with the innovation in subsea technologies, and then another company learning, and then the other country leading. So if we look at how that translates now to the green economy of the future, we've been developing subsea power management systems in Norway for many decades, very successful, and they're widely in use. This is one of the biggest technological challenges for the North Sea, the UK side of the North Sea, in terms of the emissions that we have from our current oil and gas industry. So again, we're taking that technology, we're working together to develop it. But again, when we look at the future of floating wind, we've talked a lot about the fact that the technology is there today, but we need to scale, we need to improve the price point, we need to improve the efficiency. For me, this whole subsea area is going to be hugely important for floating offshore wind going forward. If we can move the floating substations to be subsea substations, very strong parallel with what we've done in oil and gas, it is a game changer again in terms of cost and also in terms of its impact on the environment, its reliability as well, and its efficiency. So the whole collaboration and R&D piece comes into it. And then very finally, because I've taken more than a minute, there's no question that biodiversity is a hugely important focus for all of us. I mean, at school, we all learn about the importance of ecosystems and not affecting the balance of them. I think the only note I'd make there is that I think we've still got a long way to go. To look at the endangered species list across the world, it grows exponentially year on year. So I think this needs to remain a big focus for us. But absolutely, I think we're much stronger together than if we try and do things individually.
Thank you, Sean. It's no problem that you took more than 1 minute because everything you had to say was a very interesting and valid point. I'd like to invite Frederick to also add his view on what he's seen presented today and the development and the scale and the speed of development.
Today we spend globally 145,000 terawatt hour of energy. 116,000 of this terawatt hours is fossil fuel. That's the figures, that's the change, and it gives a dimension. In 1993, we paid Sintef money to see if we could build a gas power plant on Statfjord A when the oil was out with carbon capture and storage. That's some years ago. In the North Sea, we have an enormous amount of stranded gas. The government in Norway have 80% of the cost to decommission the platforms. So the cost now to decommission Statfjord A will be 8 billion. Every year you could delay that cost would be with 5% interest rate, 400 million, okay? For each kilowatt hour we spend on green hydrogen, we get 5 times more back with ready compressed CO2 to make blue hydrogen. So the best way to use the offshore wind is where we have the possibility to put up facilities for hydrogen or ammonia production on platforms that goes out of production, but even probably with floating new floating equipment or installations, it will be the cheapest way to produce hydrogen. If we are going to produce hydrogen for the Swedish steel facility in the north, it's 15 terawatt hour, that demands 700 square kilometers with onshore wind. Okay, we have some resistance here to that. So what we have the possibility here is to make use of the stranded gas for ammonia production produced by offshore wind and we get 5 times more hydrogen or ammonia by doing that with stranded gas than the so-called green hydrogen. I think this is very important when we are going to do the green transition and are going to shift this 116,000 terawatt hour. I'm very happy to also say that we are now the biggest producer of seaweed in Norway, and we see that we get quite a good biodiversity around the facilities on the west coast. And I look very much forward, if not fish farms, but I think there is a huge potential to grow seaweed in offshore wind installations and make this integrated. So that's the biodiversity. But the best thing we could do is to get production of ammonia and hydrogen with the stranded gas based on offshore wind, and forget a little bit about this green hydrogen. The future is not fossil fuel free future, it's pollution free future. And if not, we think that this will be impossible to achieve.
Thank you very much, Frederick. So I have a few questions, so I'll start in perhaps. Yeah. So I think firstly, very much thank you for presenting the perspective, and you've really given a good kind of rounded picture of what can be done. I will ask a couple of questions like, for example, I mentioned earlier, there are countries around the world that don't have the financial muscle to do this. So I would ask first from the industrial perspective and the NGO perspective, what do you see that can be really done to help accelerate this, to help countries and regions that do not necessarily have what it needs to put in place?
There will always be different solutions due to the regional circumstances. So we are very lucky in Norway that we have this enormous potential. And the biggest and most important thing we can do is to drive down the cost. And maybe also this technology in the future could be used. For example, I am very against biofuel, but I very much like the releases and biochar with syngas. Maybe what we do here with making ammonia or hydrogen this way could drive down the cost also to do that on syngas from biochar production in the future. So this is, the rich countries have to take the early mover and risk take the cost and get down the price, and then the different solutions will be adjusted to the local frame and circumstances.
So us in the countries that are more developed can afford to take this risk, and we can afford to learn. Sean, can I bring your perspective in on this as well?
I think I echo actually what's just been said. I think it is about that first mover advantage to bring costs down. You repeat it, and then you're able to offer a lower cost, more efficient solution to the countries who can least afford it. And I think we've also heard a lot at COP about the balance. You know, the more developed and the richer countries are going to have to do a lot more, a huge amount more, and accept, as it was talked about in the earlier presentation, having emissions-free UK, North Sea is no use unless you have an emissions-free world.
Yes, yes, indeed. So we really have this possibility to be the early mover, and there are many benefits. Niels, would you like to kind of come in on the benefits that really we can get, the perhaps unseen immediate benefits through working on the North Sea project?
No, actually, I'm going to ask Frederick about the question. I mean, your statement about hydrogen, did I get it right that you think it's really silly to make green hydrogen? I mean, there are areas where there are a lot of stranded electricity, and it's not so hard to, it's not so easy to store electricity, but hydrogen is a way you can store electricity and ammonia. Right, we get to answer that.
Okay. Just a moment.
Or speaking, I guess.
And thanks for your patience, Frederick.
No, but yes, I think that there is important to try to drive down the cost, but there's also some physical and chemical laws here. So yes, you will have some places with locked-in hydrogen, but for me, when you get 5 times more hydrogen per kilowatt hour you put in with using gas, and you are going to get 116,000 terawatt hour electricity to replace the fossil fuel. don't see that Norway in general, I agree some places where we have locked in electricity, but I don't see even in Europe that with all the electricity we're going to build out, the direct use of electricity, we have a huge need for more electricity.
Yes,
so I don't see the very big role for green hydrogen at this moment. I think we should continue to do research. I think maybe on solar in the future, maybe to blend into syngas, but in all over, we need to use the fossil fuel resources to produce the hydrogen and ammonia.
Basically, what you're saying is that we need to utilize both the fossil fuel path and the electricity, renewable electricity part,
and the direct use is more efficient.
Have different profiles when you produce this.
Yeah. Yeah, and electro fuel.
Okay,
is also,
then I'm good, because I thought green hydrogen is silly. I don't think so at all.
Question, yeah. Right. We don't have enough electricity to do all this.
No.
Well, it's good that we have an agreement and consensus.
That's why
we do have to
carbon capture and storage.
So we do have to collaborate. I'm really curious about some of the industrial perspectives that, like, what do you see as the roadblocks when you want to go on further with these developments and when you want to accelerate from an industry perspective? Are there some roadblocks, or is there something really that you would like to see changed, whether it be policy or what capital?
Yeah, and I think, and maybe I'll talk more from a wind perspective because I know it better than some of the other industries. But certainly from a wind perspective, there is the policy. And if I take a UK approach at the moment, the policy is too slow. The regulation is too slow. We have fields being developed every 2 years. It's boom or bust. The current Scotland wind development is 10 years until it's in operation. We need to accelerate this quite significantly. And the second part for me is about this early investment as well in the technologies and the capabilities. We need to be able to ramp up the capabilities now to get to the right price point, or we're going to build a big white elephant that is simply unaffordable to the consumer. And I think this whole issue around fuel poverty is becoming quite an important one in the UK as well. So the R&D funding that we talk about in this report, I think is hugely important now, and I think we can achieve it. Those are probably two of the areas that I think we could do with quite a bit of improvement from a UK perspective, and then from a Norwegian perspective, they'll be slightly different because there's hydropower and a number of other sources as well.
Oscar, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting discussion, and I think it's important to remember that, like been mentioned, we are probably going to increase electricity demand by 100-200% until 2030. And at the same time, we are introducing new technologies like offshore wind, like CCS, like hydrogen with CCS, and infrastructure to support all this development with offshore grids and offshore pipeline systems. And it's massive what we are going to do. And I think in order to succeed, collaboration is essential, but it's also essential to see that we need stimuli to accelerate both the demand side and the supply side. On the supply side, we need to stimulate hydrogen production to make the solutions for producing and transporting it to where it's going to be used cheaper. We need to stimulate the trucks and ships that will run on hydrogen, the demand for those in some ways, so that we can actually build at the same time a supply side and a market side. And I would like to say,
one moment after.
I find this fascinating, this discussion we also see at the European level between blue and green hydrogen. It's like we're afraid there will be too much hydrogen. I don't think this will happen. I think we will be very happy to take into use natural gas and steam reforming and CCS to produce hydrogen, if hydrogen is actually going to play this role that we see in decarbonizing industry and transport. And the reason is, like several have mentioned, the areas needed, the huge areas at land or sea that is needed to produce the hydrogen that will be needed to successfully decarbonize industry and transport are massive. So I don't think we are in a luxury position where we can choose the technologies that we would like to have. I think we need to stimulate the use and development of all of them.
Frederick.
I think it's okay to discuss hydrogen and ammonia in shipping and aviation. When you're mentioning trucks, I think that's absolutely wrong road. I think you will see, as they do in Sweden now, you have induction charging in the road. That will solve that. Also batteries will be the solution for heavy trucks. And you have to build out 3 times more renewable to run the truck on hydrogen than on a battery. So we should be very careful to go that route.
I'm from Western Norway. We are happy that we have roads, in that area.
Well, I'd very much like to weigh in, but I'm not technically part of the panel, but I'm a battery technologist. But so I do like to hear that we see the perspective from the battery technology side. I think we've pointed out today that there are many technical solutions that are really underway, but we need to get them to work together. We need to do a lot more research to really figure out how we can have the whole system working holistically together. One thing I think, at least from what I'm hearing, is that we should not have policy stop or be a roadblock for us. So those who are developing policy, please ensure that the policies are there so we can move on. We've heard of so many projects that have been delayed or cancelled due to the fact that the policy has not been moved or changed quickly enough. And that is hugely disappointing. And also, as we say, there is a lot of research, there's a lot of work to be done. It does require funding, but it requires people as well. So we need to really educate and continue. I'd like to thank my panel very, very much for today. I think you've been really good and very insightful, and I hope everybody's enjoyed the session today. And I'd like to thank all our audience who have been very respectfully quiet, I have to say. Thank you. And also those of you who've joined us in the live stream. Thank you very much.